me, the guy in your walls. So, something you don't know about me is that I love playing Magic the Gathering. I especially love Commander. I like the interactions with the decks, interaction with the cards, and the interaction with the players. I find it really fun and satisfying. But I thought to myself that Commander can be a very difficult game to understand. So I thought to myself, what deck would I make them for them to get into the game? Note, this is just more of just like a brain fart idea. No, not a brain fart. Just an idea I thought of in my head. So, as I was thinking about this deck, the first rule I thought to myself, it must contain cards that completely explains itself. So, a wise man once says, reading the card explains the card. It must not contain a certain very difficult mechanic and has no bloody text to explain what it does. But if it contains a difficult mechanic and it explains the mechanic, but if it's things like mutate, don't put it in, or day and night cycle, I'm not going to do that to the player. It's just not worth it. But also note, it's not the end of the world if the player just asks the questions of, hey, what does this mechanic mean? So I also don't want to have cards that is really simple mechanics. So things like flying, flash, double strike, island walk, infect, vigilance, reach. So these are the type of mechanics that it's completely fine if it doesn't explain itself, because then you could just easily explain what that mechanic means. But like I say, if it's day and night cycle or mutate, it's not worth putting in the deck. Rule number 2 I made for myself is that the deck must contain 3 or less colours. This is so that the player doesn't get thrusted upon into some big 5-mana colour deck, and it just won't be so that it won't be too daunting. But I also kept it down to 3 colour so that I can still do stuff making the deck for the player. For example, if I was doing Teamer, I can still base it around plus encounters, drawing cards, big creatures, landfall, copying spells, instants. The third rule I thought of is that I want it to be powerful, but I also wanted it to just make it do really cool stuff. So I want the player to not be completely wiped off the face of the planet and be like, oh wow, this is a really cool game, I wish I wasn't dead, But I also don't want the deck to be so powerful that it's just not really fun to play. I kind of want the deck to just be a really cool deck that the new player could understand and play and have fun with, while also being decently powerful. Rule number 4 is that I want the deck to contain at least more than 2 legendary creatures in the deck that they could play as a commander. This is so that the player has more choice of what they want to play with their deck. It could be either, I want to play this card because the mechanic is really cool and I really like using that more than the original commander for the deck. I just want to play this card because this card is just really cool and it just looks cool. That's it. The mechanic is not even that great. It just looks really cool. So it just makes it much more fun if the player has more of a choice to play with. Like I say, it's not the end of the world if the player asks, hey, what does this mean? It's not the end of the world. It's not meant to be a deck that it gives to the player and be like, sharp, here's a deck and play, It's just meant to be here's a deck that is easy to understand with, yet you could have fun with. It is. And it's not the end of the world if you ask questions about it, because we can easily answer it for you. So, with this information, our commander will be Cuthus, Tyrant of Jund. This is mainly because of one, is going to be simple of what it's going to be about. It's going to be ramping up into big dragons and then smacking them in the face. Secondly, it's Jund, which in my very biased opinion, the best 3 colour, mainly because you have the ramp in green, the dragons in red, and the graveyard recursion in black. Thirdly, being the fact that the commander is surprisingly good, really. It's 7 mana for a 7/7 flying. You literally just gain control of all dragons. That's nice because your opponents might have dragons and be like, nah, it's mine now. And just to add a little touch towards it, they also gain haste for your dragons. You know, that's a nice little touch because now they could just enter the battlefield and attack. And lastly, it's dragons. I love dragons, you love dragons, everyone loves dragons. As if in all big spells deck, the most important thing that you're going to need to add is ramp, right? Nothing sucks more than waiting 7 turns to cast one big thing and then you die. In this deck there's about like 11 ramp cards. 4 of them will be cost reduction, which in my opinion is the best ones. In my opinion, because all your spells are just going to cost less, rather than being like, I'm going to tap this to add this mana. So that's what I've chosen. And in those 4 would be Dragon Lord Servant, Dragon Speaker Shaman. They're very good, just as like say, it's cost reduction. And the other 2 being Urza's Incubator. Like I say, very good in any tribal deck, and costing 2 is, you know, like I say, very good for ramp. It is. And last one being Helltorn, mainly because it's very good for like looking at top card of your library and being like, oh cool, I basically just get to draw an extra card. However, there's also more to that. I also added Sarkhan, the Fireblood, mainly because like you get to add 2 mana, which is really good, right? And it was also very versatile because it also helps you to draw and discard a card, which is, I think, is really neat to have, because it helps just like you just need to get rid of something that is very useless at the moment, just for look for like either like lands or to look for like answers for to deal with threats. So I like Sarkhan Fire Blood in my opinion, and also its ultimate gives you 4 dragons, which is neat. It is pretty neat, and it's very cheap. It's basically 3 mana, so I say that's very cheap. The other card will be Fanatic Ronus, a very recent card. I like this card mainly because as soon as you get your first big guy, like it's very good because you're just adding 4 mana now. You are, and I like that a lot. And it also has Eternalize, so you can just like exile in your graveyard and have a 4/4 zombie, and it taps itself for 4 mana, and you don't need any other big creature. So I really like Fanatic Ronus a lot. The other one would be Rivas of the Claw. It's very good because, like I say, it adds 2 mana. I like that a lot, but I like this one a lot because, like I say, it adds 2 mana, but also you get to play cards like out of your graveyard, which I think it's very useful. Like I say, the only downside is that it exiles your cards after it dies, but other than that, I like this card a lot because, like I say, it's a good like ramp card, and it's I think it's a neat like graveyard card. So I like this card a lot. The next ones being the Dragon Orbs. So the Orb of Dragonkind I like it because, like I say, it adds 2 mana, even though you kind of have to pay 1 to add 2 mana. And also, like, you can look for more dragons, which I think is pretty neat for 1 red mana. Next one being the Jade Orb of Dragonkind. I like it because it gives your dragon hexproof until the end of your next turn. Because one thing that kind of sucks, that is you waited for like 4 turns to play your really cool dragon, and what really sucks is one of your opponents will go like, no, I'm gonna exile it, you know, and then you just like wasted like bloody like 7 mana to have it get exiled and probably just either gain life or search for a land. So I just kind of like having like protection cards a little bit to help not just get completely wiped off the face of the planet. And the third dragon orb being the Carnelian Orb of Dragonkind, mainly because your commander won't be here all the time, and so like it's nice to have another card to just give out haste. So I like it a lot. And the last one will be Dragonhoard Treasure, mainly because like I say, like even though it just taps for 1 mana, whenever a dragon enters, like you can have a gold count on it, and you just get to draw cards, and I think that's really neat. I don't think it's a staple in all dragon decks, but I like it enough that I think it's a really neat card to have in the deck. That's just my opinion on it. One of, if not the most important things in any deck is card draw. You need to find your own way of having card draw, because like you wouldn't want to be in a position where you have only 1 or 0 cards in your hand and you literally just scraping up the top of your library. So in this deck there's about 9 cards that draws you cards. Now I've already talked about Sarkhan Fireblood and Dragon's Horde, but I haven't talked about the other 7. The first one being Dragonborn Champion. For this card, it says like you can only draw a card if you deals 5 or more damage to a player. Now here's the thing, most of your dragons could be power 5 or greater, and so when they smack someone in the face, you're likely just gonna draw a card anyways from it. So I find this card to be a very useful card, and it's already like of power 5 or greater, so it's gonna help you just draw a card even if it deals damage. The next card I'm going to talk about is Beast Whisperer. The reason why I chose him is because, like I say, a lot of your ramp spells is going to be like cost reduction, and I find that Beast Whisperer is going to help you draw cards, because as all your spells are going to cost less, you're likely going to cast more spells, which in turn Beast Whisperer will see that and will draw cards from it. Even if your creatures gets countered, you will still be able to draw a card because it's still on the cast trigger. So I find this card to be really useful in most creature decks, to be honest. Next up will be Elemental Bond. Like I say, because of Beast Whisperer, you're going to be casting a lot of big creatures that are bigger than power 3. And things like Elemental Bond will help you just, like I say, just like gas up your hand a lot. Next will be Garruk's Uprising. Same thing as Beast Whisperer and Elemental Bond, but as it enters the battlefield, you already get to draw a card. It also gives your creatures Trample, which is very good because not a lot of dragons has Trample, so it would be really nice to have big creatures just be able to just wash towards your opponent with damage. The next one will be Outcaster Trailblazer. Now, the reason why I picked this is because of the plot spell. Really, if you have him and Fanatic Ronus, you literally get to add 8 mana in like turn 4, which is really fucking good to have. Add the fact that, like I say, it's power 4 greater, and you literally just get to gas up your hand a lot with a lot of reduction spells. Although the problem with Outcaster, Trailblazer, Elemental Bond, and Garruk's Uprising is that they do require the creatures to enter battlefield. That's the only weakness from them. But other than that, they will help you gas up when you play big creatures. Now for the last two, I'm going to talk about Phyrexian Arena. This is mainly because just to help you just draw cards mainly. It will just help, like, it's nice to just draw 2 cards like before you even start your main phase. So I find this card to just be really nice to have in your deck. And the last one being Underworld Connections. This is mainly because one of those cards to have when you're starting to run out of like gas to draw up and you really need to find an answer. And this is just there if you need to tap a land and draw a card mainly. Next up are the cards that are there to help protect your creatures. So in this deck, I have cards that would help protect. Now, I've already talked about Jade Orb of Dragonkind, but I've also put in a deck Rhythm of the Wild. Now, here's the thing. I love Rhythm of the Wild. It is one of my favourite cards. It's 3 mana, so it's really cheap to cast. It protects your creatures from counter spells, which is just could help be really annoying to your opponents. That is blue, and it also gives your creatures Riot, which is very, very useful because it can help like bring out creatures, and if you need to be aggressive, you can just give them haste if you don't have your commander and just immediately just smack them in the face. Or if you need to protect yourself from other creatures, you can play that card and give them a +1/+1 counters, which would help make them much more dangerous towards your opponent's creatures. And the last card being Asceticism. I might have butchered the name, but the reason I put this in, although it's 5 mana, right? It is very useful because it gives your creatures hexproof, so it's very good just against any spell that isn't a board wipe, and it also gives your creatures regenerate, and it just helps just prevent any like damage dealt, or even if your opponent has a board wipe, you can literally pay 2 for each creature on your board to have them just survive. So it is a very useful card to put in a deck. And next up will be the graveyard recursions. Now, because your creatures will die, you will need some cards that would help bring them from the graveyard. Now, I've already talked about Rivers of the Claw, but there is cards that will just help just not get exiled after it dies again. That being the Ancient Brass Dragon. Now, the only issue with him is that he's 7 mana and you have to connect a creature and roll a dice high enough result to bring back the dragon that you want to have. But the fact that it's a D20, if you get a 20 and likely just recur 2 creatures from your graveyard or more, is really good. It is, and I like this card a lot. Blade Wing the Risen. I like this card. It looks cool. It's a zombie dragon. It recurs to dragons, and it can buff up your creatures for 2 mana. That's really nice. It's 6 mana, but for 6 mana for 4/4 with flying that can buff your creatures up and recur a creature, it's not bad. It's pretty good. Now, next up are the sorcery spells that will recur your creatures. So things such as Badlands Revival, mainly because it's 5 mana and you get to recur 2 stuff. I find that to be really good because then you can just return a creature from your graveyard onto the battlefield and then return like an enchantment that was destroyed and put it back into your hand. I find that to be really useful. Next up is Rise of the Witch King. mainly because it makes each opponent, like I say, sacrifice a creature, and you can just bring back a permanent card. So just not just a creature card, any card, and it's 4 mana, so it's pretty cheap for a recursion spell, and just put it back on the battlefield. Next up is Journey to Eternity, which can flip to Axel Cave of Eternity. Like I say, I might have butchered the name, but I find this card to be really good because it's just a recursion card on a land. Like that, I find to be very useful for the deck. I like this card a lot, and I had it before in my The Victors Asmazzi the Dire deck, and I find that to be a very useful card to put in a deck because, like I say, it's a land that taps for any mana, and to fight, like, although you have to tap 6 lands to recur a creature, it's just a nice thing to have in case of you just run out of cards in your hand and there's your graveyard is just thick. It is. Next up is Palace Siege, mainly because you can choose of whether to recur a creature or have your opponents lose life and you just gain life. The dragon part, I'll be honest, it's not that great. It's just there to just have a choice to be a dragon, but it is sort of nice to just have like a little bit of life gain and have your opponents just slowly just die off. The best part, to be honest, is just Khans, and to be honest, you might be a bit of a heretic if you chose that one for a dragon deck, but it's very good for recurring creatures. It essentially acts like you just get to draw a card from your graveyard and then draw a card from your library. That, I think, is a pretty good card, to be honest. And lastly will be Quest for Necropolis. Now, this is a bit of a weird card. The thing is, I added Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expansion and Twisted Landscape, which are all 3 cards that can just combo off and it just slides upwards. But it also, you could have a likely chance of just paying 1 mana, sacrificing an enchantment, and just bringing back a creature. And when you sacrifice this card, you have other spells that can recur this card from your graveyard, in which you can play this card because it's 1 mana, and then have it be sacrificed again to recur another creature from your graveyard, or an opponent's graveyard, which is really neat if you want to steal someone else's graveyard, which is nice. Lastly is the directly I need to destroy this thing removal. These things need to be in almost every deck, really, because you're always going to encounter threats. So the first one is going to be Death Spout. Now, the only issue is that it's a bit expensive for 1 black, and green, but with that you get a better murder and a rampant growth in instant speed, and I think that's really good. Next up is Power Word Kill. It's a 2 mana instant that destroys something, although you can't destroy angels, demons and devils and dragons, but with you can't destroy dragons, it can protect you if an opponent redirects the spell, so that's really neat. It's just that you can't target the angels, demons or devils. Thirdly is Putrefy. This card can also destroy artifacts and creatures, so it's very good if there's any artifact threats on the board, and it also can prevent regeneration, which is also very useful. Fourthly is Windgrater's Judgment. This is very good in terms of if you're the main threat on the board and every other opponent is trying to attack you. This is a destroy 3 things for 5 mana, and I like that a lot because, like I say, if you become the main threat on the board, it can help just reduce the power of your opponent's board, and I like that a lot. And it's also specifically targets permanents, so any permanent, so from enchantment to land. Oh no, it can't target land, silly me. Okay, well, from enchantments to creatures to planeswalkers to artifacts, this is a very useful card because it's very like you can choose any card, and I like that a lot. And fifthly, being the Victor's Asmazididaya, it's a literal chaos on a big stick. So it attacks, you target a permanent from each player, they sacrifice it, so it can literally like go through indestructible, and they reveal the top card, and if it's a permanent, which it'll likely be either a land, it goes on the battlefield, and it's very good because if your opponent reveals an instant or sorcery, they're literally just lost a card on the board, and that's really good. Also, it's a 6/6 flying dragon. Now, before we get to the dragons, I do have some random cards I added to the deck that I think would be very useful. First off being Crucible of Fire. 4 mana, all your dragons gets +3/+3, really good. Some people think it's a trap because you tend to not play a lot of big dragons. Dragons aren't technically a big wide thing, but I think the fact that your dragons just gets +3/+3 as an anthem, I think is really good. It literally turns your 6/6 into a 9/9. It's a good caveman brain thinking bigger numbers means better. Monstrous Vortex. The reason I put this in a deck is because there's a lot of creatures with mana value 5 or greater, and I think Discover is a way better card than Cascade, because you can literally choose whether to put it into your hand or just cast it, and I think that's much better than Cascade because you have just more of a choice of what you want to do with that card, and you can literally have almost a snowball effect where you cast an 8 mana spell, an 8 mana dragon, and then Cascade into a 6 mana, and then it repeats the process, and you get a 5 mana card, and then it repeats the process. It's this snowball effect of you just get loads of stuff. Dragon Tempest, a literal staple in any dragon deck. If you manage to get a lot of dragons, that builds up the amount of damage that you deal to your opponents. It's cheap as well, and all of your creatures with flying, so it doesn't have to be a dragon, gains haste, and like I say, your commander will not always be on the board, and that is just a very useful thing to have. And lastly, being Triumph of the Horde. It gives your creatures trample and infect, a brutal thing to have, and will decimate your opponents, because most of your dragons will be bigger than 5, and add the fact that it's Crucible Fire, so that's power of 8, and then add the Triumph of the Horde being 9, so most of your dragons will likely be getting up to 9 power of infect, and you only need to deal 10 damage of infect to kill your opponents, so it is such a useful game ender. I also forgotten Crux of Fate, literal choice of destroy all dragons or destroy all non-dragons. So if you have a lot of dragons and your opponent doesn't have any dragons, it's a literal 5 mana destroy all creatures your opponents control. So I think it's pretty good in the dragon deck. So lastly, and what we all came here for, is dragons. Because what's the point of doing all the ramp, all the card draw, all the spells that's going to protect our dragons for if we're not going to have dragons? I already talked about dragons such as Ancient Brass, Blade Wing the Risen, Dragonborn Champion, and the Victor's Asmazididaya. However, there's still 26 dragons left, and I'll be honest, I'm not going to talk about every single one of them, so I'm going to pile them up into groups. So the first lot is going to be dragons that are going to make treasure tokens. The purpose of these dragons is that, like I say, they make you treasures, and when you make treasures, you can cast more dragons, because then you're going to spend more mana to cast dragons, or you can reserve those treasures to cast instant sorcery spells. Bloody activates the abilities of regeneration. You could do a lot of stuff with treasures. That's the whole treasure dragons in there. Second up is the board wipe dragons. The purpose of this is that they can blow up all the stuff you just don't like. You look at all the boards and be like, this board needs to reset. I'm going to play these board wipes. Although they do different things. Balefire Dragon is used for being specific of what player to wipe the board with. Gluttonous Hellkite is there to just make everyone sacrifice things, and then you get to have one big kaiju. Then we head to token making dragons, such as Beladros, the Witherbloom, and Nesting Dragons. These dragons are there because you have quite a handful of dragons that are going to make you sacrifice stuff, and it's very good to have cards that are there to have sacrifice outlets. You get like a reward by sacrificing those dragons. And with Beladros Witherbloom, they can give you life and can like let you pay 10 life and untap all your lands, and then you can just cast more spells with them, and that's always very powerful. Next up will be the sacrifice cards that give you value, that being Akol the Unrepented and Corvold Faker's King. Now with Akol Unrepented, it's like I say, you just get to play a dragon from your hand for free. That's the purpose of that card. And like I say, you can have a lot of tokens with Nesting Dragon and Beladros Witherbloom to sacrifice with. And with Corvold Faker's King, like I say, it's just there to draw cards, but it could also end up being a snowball effect, would be sacrificing a lot of treasures, or like lands such as Evolving Wilds and Twisted Landscape and Terramorphic Expansion, and then your dragon just gets like huge. Then we get to the kaijus. They're there to have a big scary board presence. That's really it. They're just meant to be there to look scary. To be honest, I just place them there because they're really cool. That's really it. Although with Sheevan Devastator, it can just help if you have like loads of mana and you can just dump it all into one big Hydra Dragon, and you can just smack someone in the face with a bunch of damage. There could also be what the guys in Warhammer would call it a distraction kind of effects, where every single player on the board will immediately think that this dragon is the scariest one because it's the biggest one, and they don't want to get hit for like 8, 10, 12 X amount of damage. Next up is the dragons that are there to give you more dragons. I already talked about Nesting Dragons, but there's also Lathless, the Dragon Queen, and Udvar Hellkite. Them two are honestly, like I say, dragon staples, because then when you play a dragon, you get an extra dragon, or when you attack with a dragon, you get an extra dragon. That's always good in any book, because then you're just adding another 5 or 6 power on the board. Wasitara, Netkoru Queen, I just mainly put her in the deck because she just looks really cool, and a lot of people like cats a lot. Now we're on to the double strikers. These two dragons, like I say, are there to just the damage that your dragons will cause. That's their honestly purpose there, and it's also very effective because a lot of the dragons have the deal combat damage ability on them. It's going to give you more value when you deal double combat damage. And next up, we're going to talk about the individual dragons. So the first one, Ancient Bronze Dragon. Now, like Ancient Brass Dragon, this one will also let you roll dices. However, the difference is that this one will also make your creatures a lot bigger, depending on like what you get on your dice rolls. Yeah, that's basically it. And the fact that rolling dices is really fun for the deck, and you get to have basically more kaijus. Then we also have the other Blade Wing, the Deathless Tyrant. This one is a skeleton dragon, and yeah, if you have loads of creatures on your board, you're gonna make an army of zombies with menace, and you could have them just protect you against like creatures that can't fly. And plus, I just put him in there because, like I say, he gives you an army of zombies, and he just looks really cool. Then we go on to the Bone Horde Dragon. This one mainly because, okay, in fairness, it's a little bit wordy. This one's mainly because you get a somewhat card draw with exiling the top card of your library. Then you get to have dinosaurs if you exiled lands, and you get to have treasures if you end up exiling non-land cards. So it's always going to give you value at the beginning of your upkeep, which is really, really good. And most importantly, it's a fucking dinosaur dragon. You're putting two of the coolest creatures and you have a dinosaur dragon. That's always really cool. Then we got Immerstrom Predator. Like I say, it's going to exile your, it's going to have sacrifice stuff, and it's going to protect itself, which is really awesome because then you don't have to cast like spells that protects it. It can just happily protect itself, and that's nice. But most importantly is because the fact that it's going to help prevent any recursions of big scary creatures in the graveyard or scary spells. So it's very good for like just having things never come back. And it's a vampire dragon. That's really cool. Kukushu, the Evening Star, he's in a deck because it can give you 15 life if you die and make your opponents lose 5 life. That's his whole purpose. Honestly, he's the card to be sacrificed. Then Thrakus, the Butcher, making your creatures bigger. If you combo that with Old Garbone, it can give you more treasures. That's it. And lastly, being Wrathful Red Dragon. Essentially, mainly because it's going to be like, if you deal damage to any of my dragons, I will deal that much damage to any of your non-dragons, or you specifically. And that should be it for the deck. I would love to hear your opinions, what cards I should swap out. I know it's a bit different for what I've been usually doing. I just wanted to talk about this like deck idea I thought of. And yeah, like I say, it's an idea I thought of, and I sort of built it up in the app called Mana Box. And yeah, I'd like to hear your thoughts, and yeah, thank you for watching this video.